Are there a lot more people that are bad people, or we just know about them now? I don't know. I don't know, because my parents and my existence, I didn't have the perfect childhood. Who does? But I guess some do. But I wasn't scared. And that is a tremendous benefit on then the opportunity I was able to compound the way I think, the way I feel, and all those things. So
safety is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, right.
And if we have it, we're going to develop into a peaceful, curious, and expressed human. And if we don't have it, we're going to develop into a threatened, oppressed, and scared human.
What does that's going to get into so much we're going to talk about today, but what does, of the two divergent, I guess, thoughts in the way that we are, what does the first one about safety, what does that give us? What's that foundation? What you're able to be curious versus if you don't feel safe, you're not curious. But can we explain what those two are and go a little bit deeper into those?
I believe that in order to feel like all is well in the world, we need to grow up with experience of safety, belonging, and authenticity, or the ability to express freely. And when we've got those three ingredients, the person that we become is this evolutionary being, and that's how it's meant to be. But if we grow up without one or multiple of those three things, we experience what I call an existential shift, and we feel that something's not right, all is not well in the world. And basically we become a rolling reaction to that baseline of threat and exclusion.
So before we get too deep, so thank you for, we already did. It's like, here we go. But so Natalia Rachel, from Australian born through Singapore now is where you reside. And you are, I think, on a tour of the U.S. You end up here in Cincinnati, and I think you're talking about the new book that you recently wrote, correct? Which it's fascinating. As I dug in a little bit, it's Why Am I Like This? And we can get into later and do some promotion and get some people to buy your books. But I think that conversation of why am I like this, we've started it out without that being the topic, but man, we could probably sit here for hours. And you could psychoanalyze and talk about my experiences, and we could go through a moment of therapy. And I probably wouldn't have to ask myself. I'd start on a journey to answer the question for myself: why am I like this? And me personally, I'm that deep, analytical, curious person about my own experience, about how did I end up this way? Am I a compound of my experiences? Where does confidence and self-esteem come from? You're going to articulate those more and go deeper onto you were impacted by Freud and Jung and those type of people. I'm excited about the conversation. When Dave had us set up for this, I said, okay, like anybody who writes a book that says, why am I like this? So why are we like this?
We are essentially an amalgamation of what's come before until the moment that we decide to set a boundary with the past and enter a conscious way of living and creating ourselves. Unfortunately, we're living in a very traumatized world. And we have been for many generations now, and it comes from many different directions, but trauma is a human problem. And so most of us are walking around with this silent question inside ourselves: why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Why is the world this way? Why does it feel not quite like it's meant to be? And to me, the answer is because we are experiencing unresolved trauma, and we're also relating and creating unresolved trauma all of the time. And so I believe if we want to feel better and feel a sense of well-being inside ourselves, feel a sense of relational harmony, and also create systems that don't feel so wrong and oppressive, we need to go back and understand how trauma is decontextualizing inside us, in our relationships, and in the systems that we create, and the businesses too.
So how do we do that? How do we begin down a process of that?
I believe the first thing to do is to understand our experience of safety versus threat. So a lot of our distress, whether it's internal or relational, comes from feeling a sense of threat. And essentially, trauma is when a past experience of threat that is over is living and breathing in us now. And so it informs our mental health, it informs our physical health, and it informs our social health or relationships as well. And so, because so many of us are existing from a baseline of threat, we recreate these cycles of trauma. And something that's really common with trauma is that we will often perceive threat where there is none. And so, one of the very first things I ask people to do when they're feeling that sense of threat is to inquire, well, is this feeling of threat or danger needed now? Why am I feeling this way? And often it's the past living in the present. And when we can just unlink the past from the present, we can often realize, well, actually I'm okay. And therefore I can engage differently. Another bit that's really important though is many of us right now are living in continued relationships, dynamics, cultures, and systems where threat and oppression are at play. And then that just gets really confusing because, yeah, I'm feeling threatened because this is not a safe experience or dynamic or culture or system. But when that is playing out in the present and it's being delivered from the past, that's when we start getting really confused and we gaslight ourselves and we tell ourselves, well, I should just be fine and get on with it and it's not that bad. And I can withstand and endure. And it's that withstanding and enduring that we have all gaslighted each other to believe is the way forward, to grin and bear it and to build that grit and move through.
What a great conversation today. People that are listening to this, of the people in this area that know me, are going to say, Mark, this is going to be a fascinating conversation for you. Because what I challenge myself personally, and I hope so many of us start to do in a curious environment, it's saying, hey, the things, the ideologies that I've had, that either I've been taught, I've learned myself, that I've grown up with, I'm trying to challenge myself and pride myself on evaluating those and trying to read differing opinions and to go out and search out something to say, is that thing more believable than me? So I think that's what's tough for me and everyone else to do. It's how do we set this thing on what's more believable? What I knew in the past or how I'm trying to learn and evaluate something new? Like, what's more believable?
I think to explore that, we need to understand how our unconscious or our psyche creates those beliefs. So beliefs are based on organizing principles, and organizing principles are developed by reflection and repetition. So all of the beliefs we hold are what we've been taught by our family of origin, by our community, our culture, and in some cases our religion, and in some cases by the capitalist world that we live in. So there's all this messaging that comes through to us and goes right to our subconscious. And so every time we receive a message, our subconscious receives it and it creates these files. And the stack of files become an organizing principles. They become our beliefs. And that's where our bias is born from. That's where our judgment is born from. And it's our beliefs that often block us from expansion and healing and growth and love and belonging. But it's also what stops us welcoming new ideas. So I think in order to change, we have to get curious and stay in a space of inquiry. But that in itself can feel really confronting, A, when our organizing principles and beliefs are so strong, and B, when we're surrounded by family or community or social media messaging that keeps telling us this is the way, this is the only way, and anything else would be bad. And so that shame that comes when we challenge the norm or the status quo, that's something we often have to meet again and again.
That's really hard though, right?
It's super hard.
So how do we arm ourselves with the right, and you probably don't like that word, but how do we
I'm not triggered.
There you go. Good. How do we arm ourselves then with the right faculties to march down a path when it's just not in agreement with any of the infrastructures we've built around our life?
I think being able to welcome complexity is really important. So we tend towards polarity, and it's our polarized brains that are what stop us. So black, white, right, wrong, good, bad. And so we have to learn to be complex, I can believe A and B, or I can explore C and D as coexisting together. And if we can become more complex, then there's a bit room to challenge, and not even to challenge, but just to accept multiple viewpoints. The reason that most of us can't be complex and we tend towards polarity is because there's threat coursing through our nervous systems and taking up space inside our psyche. So the more healing work we do and the more we release that sense of danger, the more space we have inside ourselves to get curious and to be complex. But it's an epic journey.
Is there a general, you said the healing work, are there general pieces of this healing work that you could communicate to us, to others? It's like, hey, here's where you start. This is a general approach.
There are many pieces. I can share a few. The first, like I said, is to make sense of ourselves in the context of trauma. So once we understand that the way we're experiencing and a lot of the distress that we're experiencing may be a function of past trauma, we can immediately shift into self-compassion and let go of a lot of shame. And it's often our shame that blocks us doing anything at all. The next is to understand how the past informs the present. And there are 3 areas to explore. One is understanding the unconscious mind and how these beliefs have grown. The next is understanding our nervous system. So our nervous system is the governing place of our experience. So we experience physiologically first. Before we have any thoughts, before we make up the stories, we're sensing in our bodies. We're very somatic physical creatures. And so to understand that our nervous system is constantly assessing this level of safety or threat. And what the nervous system does is if it senses threat, the next question it asks is, well, what do I need to do to get back to safety? And it's often that unconscious attempt to seek safety that takes us further away from the safety we seek and into danger. So it's like we're playing out a series of paradoxes. And the third piece of understanding the past and the healing work that we need to do is around attachment and attunement. So I believe that so much of our trauma has traveled through harmful relationships, but healing also happens through relationships. And if we have, I call it a map for love that is based on threat and shame and exclusion, and all of these traumatizing things, we need to learn to challenge that and to create a healthy map for love. And that changes everything. So these 3 pillars of our unconscious self are really important to work with. What often comes along with that and links into the whole complexity thing is understanding ourselves as fragmented. So most of us just think, oh, well, this is me. I am this one self. And then we shame ourselves for experiencing conflicting desires and needs and thoughts and feelings. It doesn't fit in the box that we've created and that others create for us. So we're actually all fragmented, and we all have different parts that have different needs and desires and have different tendencies and repulsions. And once we can explore ourselves and welcome ourselves as complex, a lot of healing happens. Often in the case of complex trauma, which many of us have, we have certain parts of ourselves that have been really traumatized, and it's like we've stuffed down all of the experiences and emotions and needs and desires that weren't safe to have. And a big part of healing is learning to tune into these parts of ourselves. These are the parts of ourselves that get triggered. And so when we get triggered, there's a little piece of us saying, excuse me, something that's happening feels really familiar to something in the past, and I don't feel safe, and I need you to listen to me. I need a chance to tell my story. And so as we heal, we learn to tune into these parts of ourselves and look after them and give them what they need, but also set boundaries with them so they don't drive us towards dysfunction.
That is complex.
So there's a lot of pieces to the healing puzzle, and these are just kind of the first few, but it is an epic ongoing journey.
It's almost like equally large as the Great Pyramids, maybe.
Maybe even bigger.
Right.
I believe our purpose here is to heal. That's it. Like, I truly believe from a spiritual perspective that the task of our generation is to do our healing work so that our children do not have to.
So it seems like the underpinning of all of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, from your perspective, is this idea and feeling of shame.
shame is a really big piece. Shame is synonymous with trauma, and it often goes unnamed. In the end, we all want to belong.
Where does this shame come from? So if we're going to get to the root of helping people, and so what do you do with it? Are we supposed to overcome it? Are we supposed to deal with it and know where to put it? Are we supposed to make it a part of ourselves? Like, what do we do with the shame?
I believe our task is to meet it, say hello to it, hold a space for it, but then set a really firm boundary with it and say, hey, you are beautiful just as you are. You are perfect just as you are. And stop treating yourself this way. And it's really hard work, especially if shame has traveled through our family or traveled through our culture or our religion. And then it's doubly as hard with social media telling us we should be a certain way, and the rise of coaching and success and money. So this is capitalist trauma. So it's like coming at us in so many directions. So it can be really hard to work with. So
is that shame, to simplify it, for some of the people that aren't as good at being complex as you are? So that's me saying, hey, this is a positive thing, and I'm evaluating this. Is it the feeling we have from the judgment of others? Is it created because we're saying, hey, this is how the world's seeing me?
I think we're told this is the way to be, and anything different from that would be bad or wrong. So shame's voice says, I am bad and something is fundamentally wrong with me and I should be different.
Of the 7 billion people on this earth, we only have a little 330 million here. I don't know how many are in Singapore, but that's a pretty cool. It's a country, but it's kind of a city too, all in one. What percentage of this world, of our little small speck of sand of universes and galaxies, what percentage of us do you think battle this idea of shame?
I believe this is a global problem, and that anybody living in mainstream world and trying to succeed here would likely experience shame at one level or another. It's a spectrum. So
where do we put that with? Because I don't think you would argue that whatever success is bad, because I'm assuming that when you wrote your book, which is an awesome title, I'm sure that success to you would probably be reaching as many people as you can, talking about this message, helping people heal, overcome the trauma. That's not necessarily a capitalistic thing, but you need people to buy the book.
Absolutely, and I want success. I am hungry for it. However, what I am still learning to do, because it's interesting being out in the public eye as an author and a speaker and educator, I am trying to continue to find the balance of reaching for success and all of the things I want, but not allowing any perceived lack of commercial success to change the way I feel about myself. And that is really, really hard. So before coming here, I was just in a bookstore in Joseph Beth in Cincy, and it was a really small turnout, because who am I around here? Come 40 hours from Singapore, right? And I sat there and I actually said to myself, don't worry about not many people coming. This is not a reflection of your work or who you are. And do you know what? I believed that. And I had a funny experience, because I was questioning, do you truly believe that, Natalia? And I was like, actually, yeah, that's taken a lot of work to get to. Doesn't mean I don't want a lot more people to come to my book signings.
The reason why I know that the journey that you've been on personally, if people go out and Google your name and find your website and the story, and you're a speaker, it feels like you're a coach as well. It's this entire therapeutic thing, this journey you're on. But if you truly believe that about yourself, you're starting to conquer something. You probably believe this is a lifelong journey.
It is. I will always be healing.
Yeah.
I know that. I will always be healing. And I just don't believe there's a healed state.
Oh, what a conversation around that. Yeah. I think, but if you've truly conquered that and you're able to sit in that bookstore and you're able to deal with that question you asked yourself, hey, this kind of probably feels like failure. Why aren't more people here? Is this not validating who I am, what I have to say? But you're like, no, this is okay. That is what's happening in social media today. That people only think they're successful if they have X amount of subscribers, followers, likes, shares. And it's essential that when we put something out, when we do a podcast, it can't be because you want people to see you. Produce things of value. Shout from the mountaintops, whatever mountain you can get on that you think this is valuable, but just own it and continue down that process. And to me, you're going to correct me in some of my thinking, but I'm like, hey, be confident in the things that you're doing, that they're impactful, that they've meant something to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's important to me, you know.
I agree. I've had quite a long journey creating content and writing, and some years back, no one was following my work. No, there was no book. And it's really easy to get down on oneself. And it's also really easy to listen to all the people that tell you to follow a formula to get 1 million likes. And I even explored potentially using a marketing company to help me. And when they presented the way they wanted to market it, I felt so turned off. I was like, yuck, that is not right. That is not congruent with my spirit. And so I decided to come back to my intention. So I think intention is everything. And my intention was to write and create with a very clear purpose and to speak to a very specific audience, which is people who want to heal. And I have come back to that again and again and again for many years, even when there are forces or influences that try to pull me away. And sometimes I do get pulled away and I'll go in that shame spiral. And then I come back and I regroup and I let myself know I am creating, whether it's writing, whether it's programs, anything, from my best intention to help others heal. And that is all. And when I come to my intention and I embody it and move from it, all the good things happen. When I stray from it, things don't work.
You're a strong person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I would have asked this question in the beginning, where'd the strength come from?
I think I had no choice but to be strong. Isn't that interesting? So I grew up in a lot of trauma, and so I learned to survive. So initially, my strength came from having to survive many things. And later in my journey as a young woman, I nearly died, and I had to fight to be here. What's very interesting is that as I've healed, I've actually become very soft and very fluid, but I retain the strength as well. And people often, when they're healing, get quite scared about losing the survival instincts, because the survival instincts at a time are what help us survive and prevail and get through. And so something I often share is that it's not about getting rid of those amazing qualities that helped you prevail. It's about allowing them to soften and become part of a greater, more complex self. So my strength is actually due to my past trauma.
Do you recognize and know how strong you are?
Some days yes, some days no. Some days I need a reminder.
So what do you do in those days when you don't feel as strong?
The first thing is that I allow myself to feel not so great. So that's something that I struggled with for a long time. I wouldn't want to feel that way. No one wants to be feeling bad. So I would try and force myself out of it. But that makes it worse. That sticks you in deeper. So I've learned to give myself a little bit of space to feel bad or low. Another thing that I will do is look back on some of the positive things that I've been working on. And a third thing that I always do is I reach out to a close friend. And I think affirmation and reflection and validation are so important. That's how we grow as babies. And we still need it when we're adults. We actually need others to reflect our goodness back to us. So I will consciously seek that out. And in order to be able to do that, again, I had to work through shame and all these beliefs that said you shouldn't need validation from others. And that message is actually really present on social media today, but we need each other. We are relational creatures.
So where should that validation, if we need it from others, where should we go to get that?
Safe people. The thing is, you got to learn how to identify who a safe person is, which most of us don't really understand.
Is that a small core group?
For me, it's a few girlfriends and my team at work. My team are my safe people, and I'm their safe person. But most people in my world are not my safe people, and so I wouldn't share with them when I'm not feeling great.
Those are very conscious thoughts.
I think it's interesting at the moment. There's such a push around vulnerability in the corporate space. And I think we should not be encouraged to be vulnerable with people that we don't really trust and who have not shown us that they will give us those affirmative and also very honest affirmations. And so I think being very mindful and conscious about who we share our hearts with and our pains with is really very important.
There is no doubt the person sitting in front of me has gone down one heck of a philosophical journey. And I don't know, Freud and Jung, I don't know what impacts and where, but you are complex, but in a very intentional and systematic way. You're talking about things here about intentionality, even around the people that you're sharing certain things with in life. And you're conquering something mentally that not a lot of people are able to get to a place and do that with. Because even the people that you don't share those close things with, you still respect them, I guarantee it. You talk to them in a helpful, leadership, caring, right? But in your mind, you're always analyzing those things.
I would say every breath I take is very intentional and considered. And I respect my energy and others' energy. And to me, this is about reverence, and I wish to live a life of reverence. I think because I nearly passed away, and was so sick and so disabled for so long, this life is a gift to me. And it's nice to even affirm that as I speak it, because I forget sometimes. I have complete relational peace in my life because I'm so considered. So there's no one triggering me. There's no one passing me drama. There's none of that. And I've created that, and I will keep it.
Did you arrive at this place of just this awareness through a combination of all these things that we're talking about here? Because you're very aware of all the things happening around you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you always have it?
I think to a degree. So I remember when I was very little, I was very curious. And I think it's partly because there was a lot of drama going on. And so I needed to be hypervigilant. So I needed to know whose feet were shaking this floor. When am I going to get hit? When am I going to get yelled at? When am I going to get sent out the house? So I learned to be hypervigilant, but I also learned to tune into sounds and to energy. And from age 7, I started asking this question: why am I like this? Why am I different? What's wrong with me? Why does this not feel right? And so I started writing poetry at age 7, which is pretty little, grade 2. And so I was always very perceptive and loved to write and make sense of things. And I think I was always generally intuitive, but I lost a lot of it, and also my wires got crossed. But since my mid-20s, I guess I've just been on a quest to heal. And even after I got better, so I had a lot of mental health issues when I was younger, and then physical health issues in my 20s. And I kind of healed both of those parts. But then there was this relational piece. And I didn't figure out the relational piece till last. And I started really inquiring about relationships and why some of them were so difficult and what was I contributing. And I just got really, really, really curious. And interestingly now, everything I teach, regardless of what layer we're working with, is all about the relational piece. So I wish that had come first. So I've worked really hard, and I'm still working, maybe not as hard. It doesn't feel painful, but there's still effort.
So can you share with us what you learned about this relationship or relational piece?
So much of our distress and dysfunction travels through relationship dynamic. Similarly, there is so much ability for healing through relationship dynamic. And so once we do a certain level of healing work and purify all of our bias, or, we're always going to have some, but to a degree, a lot of our bias and judgment and that sense of threat, we actually become the resources that we've all been looking for and all been trying to create externally. And so once we understand that we are the resource, we actually can tap into our innate human intelligence and learn to relate in ways that heal rather than harm. So many of us have really good intentions, but we're unknowingly really upsetting other people, saying the wrong thing, and continuing to spread or leak our past trauma into dynamics. And the moment we're able to tap into our intelligence, all of that changes. And so this is my big focus on my work moving forward, is to help all of us, or as many as possible, reach that level where they can tune into themselves, where they can see others with certain clarity, and learn how to be very intelligent in the way that we're relating and showing up for each other.
Do you still have the poems from the 7-year-old Natalia?
I don't have the poems from the 7-year-old Natalia. I've got a book of poetry here and notes, but interestingly, recently I went back to Australia to visit my family. My mum's not well, so she's moved into special care, and my dad has been emptying the house out. And I actually did not have the capacity to look at everything. It was too painful, and I had other things going on. I got children to look after. I'm building my business. And I said to my father, that one box with all of my writing, please don't throw that away. The rest you can throw. And it's this box from maybe like 8 or 9 years old that has so much of my writing, and it's all covered in photos of me and my family. And then like there's like contact. I don't know if you have contact here, all over it. So that box is waiting for me when I'm ready, but I'm not ready. Still healing.
Do you think there'll just be a day where it's time?
I think so. And maybe this is a bit strange to say, but I think it might be after my mother passes away.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think, when's the last time you were in Australia before that?
The last time I was there before that was about a year prior.
Okay.
And I was also there to see my mother. Mm-hmm.
Okay. This, to make it a little bit lighter, Singapore. It is, this is going to be the selfish moment of this conversation. It's one of the most fascinating countries to me.
Why is that?
Well, just, it's probably going to be in conflict a little bit here about what we're talking about, but it seems like the extreme level of success that country had in such a short period of time that the previous ruler received credit for. And, I watch a lot of YouTube and listen to him quite often. He's been interviewed. I think he passed away. The country transformed into this, it probably feels like New York City. I don't know. You'll have to share that with me. But the massive level of success, wherever we want to put that, seems tremendous in such a short period of time and such a small geographic space. So I don't know. I don't know why it seems so fascinating to me, but it's one of the places. I can go to Spain. I can go to Paris. I can go all of these places, and there's something fascinating. So tell us about Singapore.
This is my 7th year in Singapore. So initially it was not my choice to move there, but it was one of the best things that ever happened to me and to my family. It is a very busy and fast-paced place, and it's very small. It's known as the Little Red Dot, and it's the Asia Pacific business hub. So most of the big global organizations that you would have out here have their APAC hub in Singapore. And so that's why we moved from my ex-husband's role. He needed to be in Singapore. And initially I was very overwhelmed by it. I'd never lived outside Australia, and I had, the big house with a yard and my 4-wheel drive, and I decorated it all, and I thought this would be the home I die in and raise my babies in. And so when we came to Singapore, there's no house, there's no yard. We're all living in condominiums, so little apartments. And so that felt really strange. There's far less space than I was used to. So there'd be loads of parks and places to go walking in Australia and these big expansive beaches, and there was none of that. And so that felt a little overwhelming too. What I really loved about Singapore was that it was very clean and very safe, great place to raise children. And something else that was amazing there, but initially took me a lot to wrap my head around, was that most families have help in the home. So we have what we call helpers, which are foreign domestic workers, and they mainly come from the Philippines or Indonesia, and they live in the home and they help the families. And initially I hated that idea, and I thought, this is awful. How could I have someone help me? And everyone where I grew up, again, it's these biases and organizing principles, was shaming me about it. And I thought, let me try. And when I moved, I was actually still really sick, and I had 2 children, being sick back in Australia with no help from anyone and a husband who was gone like 70 to 80% of the time. So it was hard. And then I came to Singapore and I had a beautiful woman in my home to help me care for my babies and to help me like prepare a meal or make the bed or all these things. And that help, that relational piece, is one of the main factors that allowed me to heal and to thrive. It's also something that allows me to now fly around the world and build my business. So I think there's a culture of support and care in Singapore. Something else that's really different about Singapore is that it's equatorial. So it's hot all of the time. And I now love it. So I'm struggling here in the Ohio cold. But it's summer all of the time. And that really worked for my body. So my body thrives in the heat and the humidity. And it meant I was outdoors all the time and sweating all the time, which actually allowed my body to detox. So I think it's a very special place. One other great thing about it is it's really close to a lot of beautiful islands like Bali and Thailand and Langkawi. And it's just like doing a local flight here. So it's a couple $100 to go to a beautiful tropical island. So traveling in the region has been really wonderful too.
See, that's why I'm fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I pull it up, there's all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So you were fortunate to have the opportunity. Didn't feel like an opportunity then, but hindsight, it was such an opportunity. As you're sharing that story, I'm thinking about the people that don't get an opportunity. So imagine, and if you're like, Mark, you can't go there. Imagine if you wouldn't have had that opportunity.
I would still be sick. I would possibly be dead.
So how do we help those people?
Do you know what? The sad truth is we can't help everyone. And that is such a truth. And I believe to keep ourselves congruent and honest and not burnt out trying to help everyone, we need to meet that grief again and again and again. We can help as many people as possible with the resources we have, and we can learn to distribute them in far better ways. We can also learn to take less profit and share, which is something I'm very focused on in my company. We can't save everybody, and that's terrible.
What is the somatic philosophy that really drives you?
What do you mean by somatic philosophy?
Well, because as I dug into your website, and so I guess explain, and I even typed in, like, what is somatic? Like, what is it? Because somatic is a meaning, a philosophy, an idea. And how I see it is, it's speaking about the body and the mind.
Somatic means of the body. And I think so many of us are dissociated from our body. So many of us are really oriented to our mind, or we're actually living outside of ourselves. And sometimes you can ask someone, are you in your body or out their body? And like, oh, I'm actually sitting next to it, or I'm up on the ceiling watching. And when we are not associated or somatized to our body, we cannot be in tune with our intuition. We cannot be in tune with our boundaries. And we cannot be in tune with the little markers or signals that tell us when something's really good for us, when something's not good for us, and when we're approaching our boundary or limit. And so I believe in order to live a life of peace and power and sustainability and equity, we need to all be living firmly in our bodies and be able to tune in to all of these little signals and cues, and not only tune into them, but respond to them.
Who are some of the people that I don't know if what is it, Antonio Damasio, don't know the name. And so he has this idea about this somatic marker hypothesis, and it's pretty deep as you start to read some of these things. He's a neurologist, and he's in California University. So how can we take this journey that you've been on, no doubt, as I hear about your story and your life? You're not going to be able to help everyone, that's what you said. But then you wrote this book that speaks to this question I think so many of us have. So the more people, I'm assuming, read that book, what do you think our takeaway is from your book? What is it? If I read it, how's it going to help me? And so then if we can have as many people read it as possible, well, then you are touching tons.
Yeah, I mean, I've figured out that the way I can help the most people is through my words. So I can help far more people if I write and speak than if I see clients one-to-one.
Mm-hmm.
I can also help far more people if I work in large organizations with leaders and then have them going on to share within their organization. So I really believe that that's how it scales. The biggest takeaway most people take is that in the context of trauma, they make perfect sense and there's nothing wrong with them. And they have full power and permission to change their lives.
So you have a leadership workshop, right? And as I was digging into it a little bit, it's a human intelligence leadership program. Be the human that heals. So you built that for organizations, I'm assuming.
Yes, so it's a 4-module program, and it's either run within one organization or sometimes I work with a multi-organization cohort. And we basically take a group, or I take a group, on a year-long healing journey, which goes from becoming trauma-informed and learning how trauma and threat and exclusion show up inside us and in dynamic, and learning these relational intelligence strategies to start showing up as a human that heals. So module 1 is really giving you the basics and giving you this shift, so switching off that existential shift and going from shame to self-compassion and disempowerment to empowerment. Module 2 is about mastering the nervous system. Module 3 is that complexity piece, understanding the fragmented self, not only for ourselves but for others, because when someone's fragmented and triggered, doesn't matter how rational or congruent you are, they can't hear you. So you've got to learn to talk to the unconscious. And then module 4 is called the laws of peace and power. And this is where we take all of our personal healing work and development and actually start to build cultures and systems that have origins of peace and power. So all of the systems in our world, if they're created by people, so if the people creating the systems are full of threat and bias, they're going to create oppressive and exclusionary systems. And so we keep talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health, but until the people creating the systems are embodied themselves and really get it, they're just going to keep creating other versions of the same thing. So the last module is about how you build systems that do promote peace, power, equity, sustainability, and also how to work with ecosystem building. Because again, it's all about relationships and dynamics and how we do this together.
On the first module, did you say about rational intelligence or relational intelligence? So speak to that.
So if we really want to help somebody, we need to understand how to harness the power of our presence and relationship to support them. And most of us are not so considered or intentional. And so because so much of our dysfunction stems from relationships, so too can healing and change. And we can get into that in many layers. In fact, across the year, there are 12 lessons in relational intelligence. And it's really about understanding that through dynamic, we can counter past harm that person has experienced, and we can also offer relational resources that perhaps have been missing in that person's foundation. So we talked about earlier how it's actually through the dynamic in the family when you're very young that either gives you that good foundation or doesn't. As adults, we can reform, and we can also help someone to reform through the way we relate with them.
If someone were to say to you, I had this happen to me in the first few weeks, somebody I really value in my organization, and any time that there's challenges in front of you, I think I heard earlier you said, hey, am I right that you think it's important to go towards the threats? Is that important?
I think it's important to be with and get curious and explore, and not to bypass or override or coach our way out.
Yeah. So I'm combining these two things, but someone said to me that's in the midst of a leadership position and just a ton of personal growth. They said, I thought I had dealt with those things long ago. What would you do? Someone you care about, somebody you really love, that's going to really good places, But they said, I thought I had dealt with those things long ago.
Healing happens in layers and spirals. So it's really common that we need to revisit our past experiences and pains at different points along the journey. So there's no shame in that. And again, it's that shame piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would also suggest sometimes we process something at a very mental, rational level. But if we haven't done the somatic work and the deep feeling work, it is very common that it will come back again for us to look at once more, and usually in a much more intense way than the first time.
Yeah. I think as being a human adult, if you think you've conquered certain levels or certain things, to go back and revisit something to say, wow. And I took that as just me hearing it. I'm thinking, okay, that's a good thing. That's a positive thing, because it means you're going to somewhere you had never gone before. You're starting to visit places that you haven't been challenged that way in a very long time. What do you know that we need to know?
I know that trauma is such a global problem, and that it's essential for all organizations to bring trauma work into their process if they are wishing to move forward and create healthier dynamics for their people.
That seems, so I don't disagree, right? Because if you truly care about your people, you want them to grow, you want them to be happy, right? You want them to prosper. That's an essential part. And who we're coming to work as every morning, it's a product of our life. It's who we are in the evening. It's the world that we go into, and it's how we, I guess, process this entire thing happening around us. How do we do that? Because as leading an organization and a company, that isn't something that seems like it's been accepted, right? From employees or from leaders or from HR, or it's like, hey, you can't do that. You can't go there. You need to refer them. They need to go talk to a therapist. You need to refer them to. How does that look?
It looks like bringing me into your organization to help you all heal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're at the beginning of a paradigm shift right now, and COVID did that. But we need to really take this opportunity to go deep and to question the way that business is structured and what successful business means. We also need to question the same of healthcare. So essentially, business is anti-human. We might say it's not, and that we love our people, and yeah, that's true, but business is about money and profit, and it should be. However, people need healing, and the way it's structured isn't working. People are burnt out, and they're getting mental health issues, they're getting physical health issues. People are also quitting because they're realizing, hey, the way these businesses is set up does not support me. I feel burnt out and I feel oppressed. Who really wants to be owned? No one. But we have to choose it because it's a survival thing. So survival is trauma. Then we think about healthcare. So you mentioned sending your team to a therapist. The healthcare system is equally broken. There's not enough support for everyone. There's never going to be enough therapists for everyone. And there's never going to be the ability for most people to afford going to a therapist. So we need to rethink it. And what I would love to see is that we look at these two systems. So one is business and money and profit, and the other is healing and health. And they fundamentally oppose each other. But what if we went back to the drawing board and we developed a system where these two separate systems could be intertwined to create an ecosystem where you can have profit and you can have well-being? And I think really smart organizations that are very future focused are going to see that this is the way to create long-term sustainable business models where you're looking after your people from the get-go, not waiting until there's a huge drama. That's a theme for many families, that the support only comes in when it's total crisis. That's a theme in my family. What would be ideal is if that the support is there from the beginning, the growth is there from the beginning, and healing is a way of life, not a reaction to a huge meltdown or chaos.
In trying to be, that doesn't feel safe to the way that we've constructed our minds in business,
Mm-hmm.
because I like it. I love the thought, because I know if we're healed with different levels or experiences of trauma throughout our life, and we all are on some spectrum, I believe. And so it doesn't feel safe, not from my perspective. I literally will sit down and converse and talk and share and try to wrap my arms around anybody that works at my company. But I know the way that their mind has been framed, it does not feel safe. And I don't think that has to do with me, because I've gone deeper with a lot of my people, more than companies say you should. But I don't think it feels safe to them. And maybe I'm wrong about that.
It typically doesn't feel safe to be vulnerable with the person that feeds you, because, and for many people, they will share and ask for help, and they'll say, well, no, I can't give it to you, and now I'm going to penalize you, or I'm going to fire you. So of course people don't feel safe. And so trust comes over time. And certainly when we're trying to change a paradigm, it takes a lot more time. So employees need to learn through an embodied leader or embodied team of leaders who are actually showing up and doing the work themselves and taking time to build trust and create that new map, create that new reflective model that lets employees know, hey, it's safe to be vulnerable. It's safe to ask to have your needs met. It's safe to set boundaries. In many cases, that's not actually true at work. And something else that will really help employees feel safe is incredibly clear communication and policies and systems. So when those aren't in play, which is the case in every single business I've ever worked with, so there might be a leader that's saying, yeah, I love my people, just like you are, I'm there for them. But there's no clear policies on where's the line. Where's the line of what's acceptable at work and what's not? Where's the protocol that says if you need A, B, C, and D, these are the pathways to get it? And where is the communication that says, and anything outside this is not our responsibility? I think to feel safe, there needs to be these boundaries and expectations and policies clearly communicated, and that takes work.
Yeah, a ton of work. As I'm thinking through this, I think, but you're actually arguing for something really capitalistic. Because,
Tell me more.
well, because if that's truly conquered and implemented, humans are going to be way more productive.
I think so. But you know what's interesting is every other sort of corporate consultant or wellness or DEI person I know, they'll go into an organization and they'll sell themselves and say, if we do this belonging program or DEI program, you're going to be more profitable. And here's some fake stats to tell you how. And when I walk into an organization, I actually say, I don't care about your profit. You work that bit out. What I also say is likely when we start this journey, there's going to be some chaos. Maybe profits will go down for a while. But everything I know about the spectrum of healing and this huge arc of evolution tells me that after that chaos and that reforming period, then the expansion is huge. So I believe that what you're saying is right, that ultimately people will be more productive, retention rates will be better, but it's going to be a journey to get there, and that is the nature of healing.
Why do you think there's some short-term loss? I agree with chaos, but maybe the environment's already chaotic and it's just being covered up. Is this really going to create chaos that isn't already there?
A different kind of chaos.
Okay.
So when we put the proper boundaries in place to do our healing work and to say no to all of the dysfunction that's happening, what happens is we come back to living within our capacity, and we don't allow anyone to take from us anything that we are not able to give. And so when we start to put the proper boundaries in place, perhaps some of the things that we were loading onto ourselves are going to get dropped, or perhaps someone who's been benefiting from our lack of boundaries is going to get really angry. And in a workplace, there's going to be some pretty distressed people, and there might be a load that isn't being filled up. So you might need to hire more employees, and so profit might go down for a little bit. Or you might need to drop things and do things a bit slower, so deadlines might need to be shifted back. So all of these things will likely happen once organizations engage with this work. And I call this healing crisis. We have it in our bodies too. So usually when we begin to heal, there's this increase in symptoms and distress. And I believe our task is to understand that bit. It's a transition phase, and to really stick with it and hold ourselves through that process, because everything needs to reorganize. And after that reorganization, growth will happen. It's inevitable.
So let me challenge this a little bit, and I think this is in a good way, but let me challenge it and say, is the workplace creating that, or is that they're coming to the workplace as they are with all these different forms of trauma, and now we're going to stack this on the responsibility of the workplace that never was there? Do you think we've created it, or it's already who people came to us as, and now there's something greater that's necessary?
I think it's both.
Okay.
Most people are showing up to work with all kinds of trauma from the past, but if they're working in an environment that asks them to push past their capacity or to accept any kind of disrespect, then they're adding to it. I also want to say, I think employers or leaders get to choose just how much they're there for. And so I'm not saying that employers are responsible for the complete well-being and health of their people. Not at all. It's about being intentional and honest and clear about what you're able to show up for. And
where's that boundary?
Well, that's for every leader
Right.
to decide.
Yeah.
And again, it takes intention and it takes inquiry. And most leaders have never thought about that. Most leaders have all of a sudden are like, oh, well, we better give our people 6 therapy sessions, or let's do 6 sessions on mental health. Oh, it's May. Let's do an event for Mental Health Month. That's not intentional. These are big fat Band-Aids and nothing more. So let's look a little deeper. It does not mean you have to pay for all healthcare for all your employees forever. And organizations that work with me and my team are absolutely not doing that, but they're committed to creating a culture of authenticity, of vulnerability, and also of accountability. So when we do our healing work, it's not just about getting vulnerable. It's about owning the way we contribute to dysfunctional dynamics and actually setting boundaries with ourselves and agreeing not to bring that to work anymore.
So I haven't heard you say this, so I'm going to put a word in here. Where does this growth piece come in? Because I am naturally always looking for growth internally from myself, intellectually, emotionally, and by default, because I have accountability on myself around that growth, that transfers to others. Mm-hmm. That transfers to people that directly report to me. That transfers to other people that I engage with. I'm always pressing for that. But growth doesn't always mean numbers at work, right? Because a guy that I really look up to a lot is not with us anymore, never met him, but a Jim Rohn here in the U.S. who we love. He said, hey, always work more on yourself than on your job. And that's what I've found to be important for me. The stronger and better and, I guess, more intellectually understanding myself and others that I am myself, the better I do at work, the better I am in relationships for other people. So where's this growth piece come? Because there's this idea of a 2 types of mindset as well, with a fixed and a growth mindset. So this idea of growth, does it fit in here anywhere? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
What if we didn't have to grow all the time? What if we focused on internal peace and relational harmony and learned that we're okay just as we are and we don't have to keep growing?
See, I'm entertaining other ideas.
Mm-hmm. We're
right?
told that we need to keep growing and be better and do a good job and reach for the stars. And so it's this constant trajectory. And when we're on this constant growth trajectory, sometimes it can be quite hard to sit peacefully with ourselves. And it's a bit of a test, right? If we take away all of the to-do list and stop, how do we feel? And so if we take away all of this growth and the coaching and the goals and we start feeling not so great without it, it's a signal that it might be a coping mechanism. So there's this term I want to share called defensive accommodations, and all of us have them. It's normal. And these are things that we do to make ourselves believe and feel okay. And so for some people, it might be going to the gym every day. I need to run every day to feel okay. For some people, it might be, I need to read a book a week to feel okay, because then I feel good about myself and I feel cool. For some people, it might be drinking. For some people, it might be popping pills. For some people, it might be going doing all kinds of naughty relationship stuff. And all of us have this, it's normal. But the test is, if I stop using this accommodation, do I feel okay or do I feel pretty strung out? And if the answer is I feel strung out, if I stop, in this case, growing, it's an indication that there's something deeper to look at. So my personal goal is to be in a place where I'm okay no matter what. So sure, I can go and do the growing, but if I don't grow anymore, I'm not going to feel bad. What do you think?
This causes a lot of thought, and that's what's good. That's what these conversations are about. So a couple other things I want to dig into here. So why am I like this? Did you ask yourself that question first? Yeah, that's where books usually come from.
Every day I ask myself that. I hated myself.
There's a lot of people, I think, that have that thought.
Every day.
So what do you think now?
I really understand where I come from, and I understand where I am now. And I really love myself.
How long did that journey take to be able to say that?
Well, I'm 41. So 41.
But that, I don't know. Was it all bad from, like, I know the journals that you'll go back to someday, but I don't know if the 5 or 7-year-old Natalia, you were already dealing with some things, right? Some traumatic things. But I bet you'll go back and there'll be some very good, I know there's going to be some good writings in that box.
Absolutely.
There's going to be. That's why I wondered about it. Have you gone back to that yet?
I haven't. I also think it's complex. There's good and there's bad, and there's easy and there's hard. But when we have unresolved trauma, it's more often the feelings and the thoughts are those really painful ones. So when we have trauma, we rarely sit and validate ourselves and say, yeah, I did a good job today. It's something I do now. Wow, I taught a really good class today. Wow, I'm proud of what a great parent I was in this difficult moment. I do that now. But back then I couldn't.
What part does self-confidence and self-esteem, and I put those together. I don't know if people think I should, but I do. I put those together. What part do those play in this evolution of asking this question of why am I like this, of whether we hate ourselves or love ourselves more? Where do those factor in?
Well, I think it connects to the shame piece. So self-esteem and shame are linked. I think confidence comes from self-trust. So as we do our healing work and begin making healthy choices that take us in the direction that we want to go, we learn, oh, I can look after myself and I can get myself from A to B. And many of us don't believe we can, or something that's really common with unresolved trauma is we keep making decisions that take us into really difficult circumstances. And it's not conscious, it's unconscious, all trauma is. And so it can take a long time to really trust that our choices are healthy and that we have the ability to discern what is the right thing to do in each moment. So when we have unresolved trauma, we usually don't know how to discern. All our internal wiring is crossed. So confidence, in my opinion, comes from trust, which comes from repeated experiences of making healthy choices.
Where do we put our feelings and emotions? Where do those go in this conversation?
When we have unresolved trauma, we commonly suppress all of our emotions because it's not safe to express them. So something bad might happen. So think of a child that's being abused by its parent. It's not safe to express anger. It's not safe to lie down and cry. Like, some bad things might happen. It's not safe to ask to have needs met. And so we pack all these emotions away, and they tend to color the way we perceive and express in the world. So emotional processing is really a very integral part. And there is a whole chapter on that in the book. And I think we need to learn to tune into the emotions that we've suppressed and find a way to let them live and breathe. And that might be through crying or screaming, or it might be through journaling, or it might be through speaking words, or it might be through, I get some of my clients to hold like a pretty heavy ball and smash it down, or do Muay Thai. So we have to find a way to let them out. And once we've let out all of the past emotional charge, there's a lot more space inside us, and there's usually a lot more intelligence about understanding what emotions are happening for us in the present, and a lot more invitation from ourselves to feel. So I cry regularly, and it's what helps me stay healthy and looking good. I'm not holding it all in.
If we aren't able as a human to go down this path and this journey that you've been on and to ask this tough question, because I think, why am I like this? I think that's a tough question to ask. I think it is, because then if you ask the question, you gotta research it and you gotta dig in. If we don't successfully go down this path, it feels to me we're not capable of receiving love.
I think as we heal our trauma, a big part of it is absolutely about learning to love. So all of our survival and coping mechanisms that at one time protected us and kept us safe end up becoming the block to what we all really crave, which is each other. So I believe you're 100% right.
So what do we do with that?
I think it's a choice.
Choices. But so many of us aren't good at making the right choices.
I agree with that. And that's also why healing needs to happen in community, so in a group or in an organization, because when we are trapped inside our traumatized selves, we can't. So we don't have agency. We don't have the ability to often feel to and connect to and follow our impulses. And so often the healing needs to begin in a relationship dynamic. And in the book, I write about the human catalyst and the spark of power. We all have the ability to help catalyze another person in very small moments. And yeah, we need to do this work together.
I think so many people don't accept or know that they have a choice.
That is fundamental to trauma. So to me, trauma and oppression are the same thing. I lived so long thinking I don't have a choice, and I would say, I'm just like that. This is how my life is. I'm going to be sick forever and I'm going to die and I'm never going to be happy. I didn't know any different. And I mean, I've had some very interesting experiences, but one of my human catalysts was a shaman, and she showed me that something else was possible. She also showed me that it was safe to be with my pain. And so there have been many people on my journey who showed up for me, some for longer periods and some for just moments, who showed me that another way of existing or relating is possible. And when we have unresolved trauma, we need people to show us a different template as possible, so that we even have any data points inside us to even know that we can try to orient to create something similar.
Once you get to where you're at, because you say we're complex, the idea to me as I'm listening, I'm like, that's so simple. It seems so simple.
It is.
Then why so complex?
I guess it's a dichotomy, isn't it? It is simple, but when we have unresolved trauma, we make everything very complicated. The longer that our trauma remains unmetabolized inside us, the more complex and diffuse it becomes. So it can become really hard to spot and to decode and to work with. And something else is we are living in a very competition-focused world and a very exclusionary world. So we typically now see a lot of people as competition or something to fight against or protect ourselves from. And so we need to learn that actually relationships can be an incredible source of healing. But again, we need proof of concept. So until we experience it, we're not going to believe it.
I think this book and you and the coaching and all the stuff you provide, it's almost like, hey, you just need that spark of the journey, right? Just for someone to get up, it's almost as if tomorrow, if I thought I was going to run a marathon, I never have. I used to run a long time ago, but it's almost the thought that I can do that. And maybe that's the thing that gets you up and you start training the first day, and that there's someone around you. That's why there's probably running clubs. It's probably why there's groups of people That's why you need, I guess, a few good people around you. What's the average time frame of this journey? How long do we have to stick with Natalia?
Well, I've been healing forever and I'll keep healing forever. When I work with organizations, usually it's a minimum of 2 years. And when I work with clients, it's usually anywhere between 9 months and 3 years.
Is that something you found? Did you know that in the beginning?
I did not know that in the beginning. So again, now I've become really intentional. So with an organization, with my program, usually we go through the first year. So it's 4 modules, 3 days per module. And that gets the people in the program feeling pretty integrated and cohesive and compassionate, and also starting to think about how to create cultures and systems that are born from this place. Usually in the second year, it's a lot about implementing what's been learned in that embodied way. And sometimes we run the program again with a new cohort. And this time, a couple of the people who really resonated with it from the first time will come and learn how to teach it. Once that's happened, they can actually stay in their organization. Then you don't need me anymore. And that's how things become sustainable.
Is that what you tend to find? It always resonates with a few, not everyone. Do you find that?
Usually people who come to my groups are deeply committed to this kind of work. In terms of who becomes a teacher, it depends if they feel that inspiration and that calling or that dharma to go on and share and create. So usually I've never had someone have a bad experience in my trainings, which is wonderful, in the corporate trainings. But usually there's a couple of people who just feel, oh, this is the medicine. I want to share this.
Is this an Eastern type of philosophy? Did the Singapore experience start to open some things? Because you invoke Dharma. And, I think years ago, so in this country we have PBS, it's public television. And in my poorer days with no money and you're not paying cable bills, you have interviews with a guy like Charlie Rose. But Wayne Dyer was, I don't know if you know the name, but he's not with us anymore, but significant in the U.S. on self-hope. But that's the first person and really one of the only people I've heard talk about our Dharma.
Well, it doesn't come from Singapore, but absolutely, I suppose it comes through a lot of my spiritual studies. I've studied many different things. So Dharma simply means your life purpose.
But I hadn't heard, I don't know, it seems like I hear that whether it's through, Buddhist ideology and some different things. And I go back to a movie that Julia Roberts was in, Eat, Pray, Love. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like that's this journey, man.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right?
I've done the eat, I've done the pray. I've not done the love yet. Let's see. But I think I've studied both Eastern and Western philosophies. And I often describe the way I see the world as through a kaleidoscope. And my job or my dharma is to help other people create their kaleidoscopes and see with more clarity and step forward with more intention.
Do you think, from what you found, do you find more similarities in our trauma?
I think the fundamental experience of trauma is the same for everybody deep down. And so that's why I often bring us to processing through emotions. However, I do see the way trauma decontextualizes is incredibly different in different cultures. So I'm very lucky that working in Singapore, I've worked with nearly every culture in the world because it's such a melting pot and I can see really clear themes. And it's interesting right now, my organizational or leadership work is between Singapore and the US. And they're completely opposite cultures. So I'm a relational teacher or facilitator. So the way that I teach and the way that I show up will be dependent on who's in the room. And so in the US, everyone is pretty expressed. They're all sharing their feelings. In fact, they're yelling about their feelings. Whereas in Singapore, no one is. In Singapore, they've learned to keep them down and to obey. And so for me, the job in Singapore is almost to allow everyone to begin to let their whispers out. And here it's about allowing a space for a lot of the expressed triggers or rage to be metabolized. So it's very different.
Is one more difficult than the other?
I don't think so. I think it's just really different. I'll share vulnerably. So when I was coming for the first time to the States to share this leadership work, I was quite nervous because I wondered, is this pretty little white girl going to stand up here in the USA? I was really nervous, but I did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really affirmed to me, and it was affirmed again last week teaching here again. I even wrote this down at the end of my trainings, the module 1. We often do an affirmation and validation process where we affirm what we've experienced for ourselves and we actually affirm to each other what we've witnessed. And that's really powerful. But I affirm to myself, I truly believe that no matter where anyone comes from, what their trauma story is, what their race or gender or religion, if I am committed to showing up with a clear mind and a very pure heart, healing will be inevitable.
So 2 things, so we don't sit here and talk all day, because you have a lot of things that you're busy with, and many more people that are more highly intelligent than me. I'm sitting here like intuitive and curious, but 2 things. What are the employers afraid of?
A lot of leaders are not doing their own healing work, and they're so outwardly focused on like getting their teams through to the other side of, we're in a pretty volatile time right now, that they're not in touch with all of their own stuff. They might be going home yelling at their wives and their kids, or going home and drinking. It's really common. And so I think there's a fear for many leaders around coming back to do the work for themselves, which is required if you want to work with me. And if you want to change your culture, really, the leaders have to do it themselves. So that's number 1. The second thing that leaders are afraid of, a lot of people can't sit with other people's pain. They've not been trained to do that. And so what I hear from a lot of leaders is, I don't want to deal with that. And it's actually really re-traumatizing for someone to feel that from their leader. And that's where I say, well, that's where you need a therapist or a consultant to come in, because you've not been trained to do that. I'm a therapist. That's my job. So I think it's too heavy. It's too much. They can't deal with it. And the third thing, like we spoke about before, is that they're worried that profits will go down. A lot of people in management positions are pushed to get the numbers. And when you start spending like a few $100K a year or more on this kind of stuff, it is going to affect your numbers. So I commonly hear, we don't have budget for that.
What do you say to that?
I say, call me when you do. I'm not into pushing or forcing. That's not my place. I only work with organizations who are really ready.
So then, if that's what they're afraid of, what are all of the, I don't look at people as employees, their partners, their associates, whatever the term is, but what is everyone else afraid of?
They're afraid that if they show themselves and are truly authentic, that they will be penalized in some way. And that often happens.
But what they don't know is they're already seen. They don't understand the management conversations behind a closed door. They're already, I'm telling you that they're already being evaluated that way.
So how would you suggest that you change that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sitting here going through it, because I do want people to live a better life, to truly find happiness. And I think some happiness is just contentment with life at times, right? It's okay to plateau in different areas. And when you wake up every day to just feel good, because man, like that's the spice of life.
I think you're talking about seeing people's dysfunction at work, right? And then going into your management meeting and talking about these people, and they typically get labeled as toxic, right?
At times.
And so what would it be like if leaders had the skill to go and speak directly to that person with the right words and the right body language and the right tone, and basically be telling that person, hey, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, but the way you're showing up to work isn't working anymore. Here's how I can help you, and here's what you need to do in order for us to work together. No leaders are having that kind of conversation.
I can feel why. I mean, and it definitely is ideal, but that's a lot of time.
Exactly. Healing takes time, and systemic organizational transformation takes time. That's why I say it's about 2 years to see a real shift. And there will be some people lost along the way.
Yeah.
So when you put in boundaries as an organization, you're not only committing to helping people, you're committing to saying no to dysfunction.
Yep.
Something that's often really prevalent is many of the people in organizations that are creating the toxic behavior are often directly connected to profit. So they are the high rollers, they are the salespeople. And so, of course, the organization doesn't want to lose them. So they're going to turn a blind eye. And so we got to have these hard conversations. And if as an organization or leader, you're really clear, yeah, we know this guy's creating trouble or this girl's creating trouble, but they're a high roller, we're keeping them, at least you're honest about it. But I got to tell you, it's not going to create good energy for the rest of the team. I see this all the time. There'll be one or two characters in an organization that are really terrorizing other people, and no one's doing anything about it because they're bringing in the big bucks. And the whole rest of the organization just lose complete faith in the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important either way. I think if you don't deal with it, it's not going to work long term for a very positive outcome. It's not. I've seen that. Mm-hmm. It's not. And so one way or another, I think you need to come to terms with it's important that you do something about it. And maybe that comes off with a negative connotation, but maybe to do something about it your way.
Absolutely. And I, again, just think as long as you're conscious and as long as you're making choices, at least there is agency at play and honesty at play. And so when there's no agency and there's no honesty, that's when organizations start to feel really funky.
Mm-hmm. So what happens with that person, though? You know, Ray Dalio, very successful guy in the U.S., wrote this book called Principles. I did a book study with it with some leaders inside my company a few years ago. And what he learned, he ran one of the most successful hedge funds, and he's retired now, and he's a chairman of the board, but all he's doing now is going around and trying to educate people from his perspective about these principles. And they came up with this idea, what's called an idea meritocracy, and to try to make it somewhat democratic in a boardroom for opinions. We want the best idea to win. But it caused so much demand for vulnerability to walk into a room to demand humility from everyone that you have to walk in and almost want to be wrong because you want the best idea to win. Not my idea, but the best idea. And what they found was there were somewhere between 15 and 20% of the people that weren't capable of participating in that. And I bet it's connected to massive trauma.
When we have unresolved trauma, one of the things that we crave is belonging. And so if there is any potential that we believe from our traumatized brain that we will be excluded or less liked, we will not speak our truth. And so a big piece of healing is learning to put boundaries before belonging and our authenticity before belonging. And it's really hard because actually we need both, and it can be a bit of a tricky balance to get both.
So is the organization worried that they're going to find people who just aren't willing to participate in that and they're going to go away?
I don't understand the question.
Well, so, you know, if you're asking them to go down this path, if you create, if you bring Natalia and her organization in, there's going to be some people, I know this, I've seen this, there's going to be some people that they're just not willing to engage and be a part of it.
Got it. So I have a rule about how we create a cohort. So I never work with the entire organization. I work with cohorts, and ideally multiple cohorts. But everybody who joins a cohort is doing so by choice. So no healing can happen when there is no choice and agency and desire to be there. So I work with that same principle when I work one-to-one. You cannot just send me a client that doesn't want to be there. I will not engage. And I think people opting in is like 50% of the process. If you want to be there and you want to go through the process, you're going to be able to navigate through it.
You're going to have a high success rate coming out.
And when we create cohorts, I usually work with an organization to choose a few people from each department so that we have a really good cross-section of the organization. So I'm not working with just the C-suite team. I might have the executive director and the general manager, but I might also have the head of client care or the person who is like front of house or the director of marketing. And so when you create a cohort with this cross-section, you get a much more diverse experience and it's a lot more realistic. And it's beautiful for people from all levels of education and pay grades and cultures to be learning from each other and healing together, because that's essentially what we want out in the world, isn't it?
Yeah. So how's this going to make us better?
I think it's going to help us contain all of our bias and our trauma and our dysfunction, so we're not leaking it into dynamic anymore. It's also going to make us far more compassionate about understanding those people that you were talking about, that you're having conversations behind closed doors. You're going to understand what's going on for them, and you're going to learn to relate with far deeper intelligence. Because right now you're having those conversations because you have no idea how to deal with them.
Yeah, and you're filling out these yearly and every 6-month evaluations that don't have any of this context built in. We're constantly evaluating people in their performance without, I mean, there's nothing in there about truly how do we go from where you are to where you need to be, to go from where you are at this life, whatever's causing this, to let you truly live a better life. None of that's a part of it. That's too deep. That's too hard. That's too scary for everyone. Let's just decide if you can stay here or not based upon some metric.
And healing requires far more data points.
100%. So if we were to, so let's say an organization wants to participate with what you're offering, but they're just not at a spot financially where they can. Could they take your book, and can a book study be done around your book? Is that a beginning?
Absolutely. I mean, the book is largely for individuals, how to heal yourself. The next book that's in the works is all this organizational stuff and the relationship as the remedy stuff. But 100% you can study the book. You can learn about who you are and how you've been created. You can learn to master your nervous system. You can learn about the way you're showing up in relationship dynamics. All healing work that we do for ourselves will create social change. We are relational humans.
So how can, if an individual, if their organization isn't sponsoring something like this, how do they go down the path with you? How's that happen?
I do work one-to-one, but less and less these days.
Okay.
I teach the same program that I teach in organizations. I run open programs. So that's actually new. So I just ran the first open program in Singapore, and it was amazing. We had people actually even from the US flying in. And I'm planning, though the location isn't confirmed, my first open program in the US in September.
Okay. September of 23. Okay.
I just have to pick the location. I'm thinking of maybe San Francisco,
Okay.
but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Austin, Texas is happening now. I don't know if you thought about that.
I'm going to Austin on Wednesday to check it out.
I was in Texas a year and a half ago, and I went to Dallas and Fort Worth, went to Austin, was in San Antonio, was in Houston.
Cool.
I flew into Dallas and Fort Worth, and I had some connections of some business people there, and I said, I want to see what's going on in the state. And so I took just 5 days, and I rented a car, and I said, I'm going to stay in every city for one night, and I'm going to go out and find out what's going on and what's happening to decide if do we need to be there, right?
And you thought Texas was awesome?
I thought that, Austin is very unique. Austin and San Antonio, what I found, were different than the rest of the state. The rest of the state, I mean, it's fine. There's a lot of people there. There's good people there. But those two cities felt like they had culture.
I'm so excited to go to Austin. So it's a really long wait for me to get here.
Yes.
So I thought every time I come, I should check out one new place. So I picked Austin specifically because I heard it has such great vibes and that it's really burgeoning. And, you know, I really want to grow my work here in the US. I just feel like this is where I'm meant to be. So I'm building up to hopefully being here about 4 months of the year. And so I'm also thinking, could Austin be a nice base for me? I don't know.
I'd love to hear what you think from your worldly view, but I believe you're going to go there. And you may say, when I come in September, that's the place. I have a feeling. There's some neat things happening. And every time I hear about growth and just an evolution of a society, it's incredible what's happening there. And it seems like there's so many different cultures that are coming together at the same time. It seems pretty cool. And
I love that. I love the diversity of it. And I think when there are many cultures in one place, which is the same as in Singapore, it's much easier to build community because everybody is seeking connection.
And you know, there's a ton of Fortune 500s that are moving big ops there. I'm sure there's a reason why you're going. So
actually, I'm just going for the music and the vintage shopping.
Really?
Yeah. It's like literally 3 days of play.
You're going to find out what's happening there from an enterprise and business perspective. It's tremendous. So who knows what September brings. Well, thank you for visiting Cincinnati, however you got here. But officially, we're sitting in northern Kentucky today. We love our little enclave, and we're inside the loop. The Cincinnati airport is in northern Kentucky, too, which you found out.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very proud of that. But thank you for coming and sharing this. And I don't read all the books, I'm going to be honest, of everybody that comes through, but this one has me intrigued.
Thanks so much for having me and such a textured conversation.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to September. And is that going to be a 2 or a 3 day course? What's that going to look like?
It's going to be Module 1, 3 days. So Trauma-Informed Human is Module 1 of Human Intelligence, and it's 3 days of healing and growth and social change.
So give us the best place they can go find out about you.
NataliaRachel.com, or I'm really active on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Okay. Thanks for coming. You've brightened our day. You've made us do some deep thinking. So kudos.